Okay, so we're doing The Shining, but forget the twins, right?
Uh,
And that iconic axe scene for a sec. You've probably seen it a dozen times.
Right.
But today we're talking about something way deeper, something hiding in plain sight,
Okay.
the unsettling power of space itself.
Interesting how most horror films focus on what we can't see, but Kubrick, he's a genius.
Hmm.
He uses the Overlook Hotel's vast visible spaces to create this entirely different kind of fear.
Right. Our source for this deep dive calls it spatial horror,
Ah,
which, I mean, it sounds kind of film theory-ish,
yeah.
but it's basically the idea that a place, its architecture, its sheer size, can mess with your head just as much as any ghost or ghoul.
Precisely. Think about those massive empty rooms, those endless hallways. Kubrick uses them like a painter uses perspective to evoke a very specific feeling. Only this time, it's not a canvas, right? It's a whole building designed to make you feel small, insignificant, and maybe even a little bit crazy.
And it starts innocently enough, right? When the Torrance family first shows up at the Overlook, they're blown away by how enormous and majestic it is.
Right.
Little Danny riding his big wheel through those cavernous hallways,
Yeah.
the hedge maze that seems to stretch on forever. It's all so
Mm.
grand and inviting.
But that initial awe, that honeymoon phase, it doesn't last long. The characters, they start to feel like they're swallowed up by all that space. Think about Jack's writing room. It's less a place to work and more like a cathedral of emptiness. Or the abandoned ballroom frozen in time. These spaces are so huge they almost become characters themselves. These looming presences that suffocate the people inside.
And that's where things get really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because our source argues that Kubrick doesn't just use these spaces to create atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
He gives them an almost supernatural quality.
Exactly. There's this idea that the Overlook Hotel, it's not just haunted in the traditional sense, but it's almost like it has its own gravitational pull, a dark energy that feeds on the characters' anxieties and eventually drives them to the brink.
Okay, so picture this Jack Torrance holed up in that enormous writing room.
Mm.
The silence pressing in on him, his writer's block,
Yeah.
transforming into full-blown madness. It's like the hotel itself is whispering to him, feeding his darkest impulses.
And those long, unbroken tracking shots Kubrick is famous for.
Oh, yeah.
They just amplify that feeling. We're not just watching the characters move through this space, we're experiencing it right alongside them, feeling the weight of those empty hallways, those cavernous rooms.
It's subtle, right?
Yeah.
But it gets under your skin.
Yeah.
You start to feel that same sense of unease, that feeling of being watched, even though there might not be anything actually there.
And that ties into a really interesting point made in the analysis. The characters are never really in control, not as much as they think they are. And that subconsciously makes us uneasy as viewers, too, because it makes you wonder.
Wait, are you saying that by watching The Shining, we're somehow surrendering to the power of the Overlook, too?
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
Now that's creepy.
And it makes you wonder how much our environment shapes our thoughts and actions, even when we don't realize it. Are we really in the driver's seat of our own lives, or are we more susceptible to outside forces than we care to admit?
Now, that's a question to ponder next time you're in a large empty space.
Yeah.
But hold on, because our analysis takes this even further. It suggests that the character's terrifying experiences,
Okay.
like those terrifying visions Danny has,
Hmm.
could be their minds trying to make sense of the hotel's overwhelming energy.
It's like their brains are going into overdrive trying to process something so vast and ancient, something that defies our understanding of reality. Imagine our brains trying to process a 12-dimensional space.
A 12-dimensional space. Okay, now, my brain is officially fried,
Okay.
but I think I see where you're going with this.
Think about it. Our brains like order, they like explanations. So when we're confronted with something we don't understand, something beyond our comprehension, we latch onto familiar, even scary explanations to make sense of it.
So are you saying Jack isn't actually seeing ghosts? He's just experiencing a dimension overload?
It's possible. The source doesn't say for sure, but it makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are the ghosts real, or are they manifestations of the character's own anxieties amplified by the hotel's dark history?
Speaking of dark history, remember that final chilling image? The one where we see Jack Torrance in that old photo from 1921, right there in the heart of the Overlook's history?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
That final shot, it's not just the spooky ending. It's Kubrick's way of visually confirming the hotel's hold on its inhabitants across time. It's like the Overlook is this hungry entity digesting people and their stories, keeping them trapped within its walls forever. Jack, he's not just defeated. He's been absorbed, becoming another chilling tale in the Overlook's long and twisted history.
It's like that old saying, if these walls could talk. But in the Overlook's case, it's more like, if these walls could trap.
Exactly. The Overlook isn't just a setting. It's the monster under the bed, the thing lurking in the shadows of your mind. And the truly unsettling part is that it's not confined to the supernatural. It taps into something very, very primal in all of us.
It's funny you should mention that because when I think about The Shining, I usually picture those grand spaces, those long, empty hallways. But our source also points out how Kubrick uses claustrophobia to mess with our minds.
Hmm.
Talk about a one-two punch.
Absolutely. It's like he's playing with those opposing forces. Vastness and confinement, to keep us constantly off balance. One minute you're feeling dwarfed by the ballroom, the next you're feeling trapped in that blood-soaked bathroom with Wendy or Jax peering through that axe-down door. Pure nightmare fuel.
Don't forget those carpets. Those brightly colored ones with the repeating patterns? They're everywhere in the Overlook,
Yeah.
and they're weirdly unsettling.
Right. They're almost hypnotic, like optical illusions. You can't quite pin down the pattern, and it starts to mess with your sense of depth and perception. The analysis suggests that Kubrick used them to enhance that feeling of disorientation and unease, that sense that reality itself is becoming unraveled.
Which, let's be honest, is a pretty spot-on metaphor for what's happening to the characters. Jack's losing his grip on sanity, Wendy's sanity is hanging by a thread, and little Danny's seeing things most of us would run screaming from.
And Kubrick, he's a master of using the visual language of film to mirror their mental states. We don't just see their fear. We feel it, that sense of being trapped, isolated, and slowly losing your mind. It's brilliant and terrifying at the same time.
And let's not forget the isolation factor. This isn't just a haunted house. It's a haunted house on top of a mountain in the dead of winter, completely cut off from the outside world.
The Overlook is like a pressure cooker, isn't it? The snow piles up, the phone lines go dead, there's no escape. And as the characters become more and more isolated, their anxieties fester and grow, feeding into the hotel's darkness.
It's like they're trapped in this feedback loop of fear. The hotel feeds off their anxieties, which in turn fuels the hotel's power and so on. It's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Imagine being snowed in there. No internet, no cell service. Just your thoughts and the unsettling feeling that something isn't quite right. Could you handle it? Or would you?
Don't even go there. I'm getting flashbacks to those creepy twin girls.
Sorry, couldn't resist. But speaking of creepy, we have to talk about Danny. This kid is practically vibrating with psychic energy, picking up on the Overlook's dark vibes like a tuning fork.
Remember that line from earlier about our brains struggling to comprehend a 12-dimensional space? What if Danny, with his shining, is actually getting a glimpse into those higher dimensions, those unseen forces that most of us blocked out?
That's a fascinating thought. Maybe that's why his visions are so terrifying. He's seeing things our adult minds can't even process, those raw primal energies that we've spent a lifetime learning to ignore.
And maybe that's why adults are so susceptible to the Overlook's influence.
Right.
We've lost that childlike sensitivity, that openness to the unknown. So instead of experiencing it directly like Danny, we get caught up in our anxieties and fears, which the hotel then feeds on. So you're saying to survive the Overlook, we got to be more like Danny.
I don't know about all that. I think I'll stick with my fear of what's hiding in the back of my fridge.
Probably a wise choice. But you have hit on something interesting, though. This idea that our perception, our openness to the world, it plays a role in how we experience these unsettling spaces. We bring our own baggage to the party, so to speak. Which brings us back to Kubrick, right? He doesn't exactly give us a straight answer in The Shining, does he? He leaves it open. Is the hotel actually supernatural, or is it all just like our deepest fears and anxieties? Or maybe, and this is where it gets kind of wild, maybe it's both.
Exactly. It's that ambiguity, that unsettling feeling that something is wrong, but you can't quite place it. That's what makes The Shining such effective and enduring horror. It's not about jump scares or gore, it's about the psychological aspect. The slow burn of unease that sticks with you long after the credits roll.
It's like that feeling you get when you're home alone at night and you hear like a creak in the floorboards upstairs. Logically, it's probably nothing but a part of you can't help but imagine.
Exactly. Our imaginations are powerful tools. And Kubrick, he knows how to use them, how to use suggestion and invitation to make us question what's real and what's not.
So the real horror is all in our heads.
Well, there's an element of that for sure, but it's more nuanced than that. It's the interplay between our internal world, our fears, our anxieties, our perceptions, right? And the external world, the spaces we inhabit.
The Overlook Hotel as a metaphor for the human psyche. That's the thought.
And like the human psyche, the Overlook is full of contradictions. We've talked about the vast imposing spaces, but there's also that claustrophobia, right? Those narrow corridors, those tight corners, those moments when the characters feel like they're being boxed in, suffocated.
Yeah. Never thought about it that way. But
Yeah.
you're right. It's like Kubrick is always playing with our sense of scale, our perspective, keeps us off balance just like the characters.
And that's what's so brilliant about his work. He understands that real horror isn't about what you see on the screen, it's about what you feel. The fear of the unknown, right? The fear of losing control, the fear of being trapped. These primal instincts are just amplified by the spaces he creates on screen.
Okay, so next time I watch The Shining, which, let's be real, will probably be next week, I need to pay attention to more than just those creepy twins and that river of blood.
Yeah.
I got to look at the spaces, the architecture, the way Kubrick uses the camera to move through those spaces.
Exactly. Those details, they aren't just window dressing. They tell a story about isolation, about madness, about that thin line between what's real and what's a nightmare.
This deep dive has been wild. You know, it's easy to write off The Shining as just another scary movie. But when you really dig into it, explore those layers of meaning hidden in those unsettling spaces, it becomes something else entirely.
And that's the beauty of analyzing film. It helps us appreciate the art, the intention behind every single frame. You start to see the film in a new light, and suddenly you're discovering all these hidden depths and unsettling truths.
It's like Kubrick is whispering to us, saying, look closer. There's more to this than you think.
And maybe, just maybe, there's more to the spaces we walk through every day than we realize. So next time you're in a grand old hotel or even just a dimly lit hallway, take a second to really look around, feel the weight of the space around you.
But if the carpets start moving,
Run. All right, that's it for our deep dive into The Shining. Until next time, remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we make up in our own heads.